the National Association of Realtors last time came out with a profile of the LGBT, well, the LGB community with regard to housing issues, wants and needs, motivations. We've had trouble quantifying transgender so far, but hopefully we'll have some statistics on that in the next couple of years. So we know that, when you look at statistics with regard to home buying, the reasons for rentals and so on, the LGBT community kind of lags behind others, all things being equal. You kind of answered that question, but maybe you could say more specifically, what are the fears? And you mentioned community, you mentioned lending opportunities. Is there something that goes beyond that that we should recognize and hopefully be sensitive to with regard to just getting that community into the real estate market?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in addition, because of the discrimination resulting in, in terms of many LGBT families living below the poverty level, more so than we would see of heterosexual couples who are raising families, and the concern about security and whether or not being supportive in a particular neighborhood or community. I think the other thing is I think a lot of LGBT people, if they want to talk with a realtor, they want to feel that they're being recognized in terms of, in other words, it's not only a comfortable place that they can deal with, but what are some signs that a real estate company recognizes the diversity of buyers? Is there a rainbow triangle maybe on the door of the real estate office? Are there, in terms of materials and things that, marketing materials, do you recognize diverse families, including, same-sex couples, raising children, transgender people? I think many times the LGBT community, they're looking for different, sometimes very simple gestures that show that they're being recognized and that they're being included. And many times people might not feel comfortable being in an environment where this is something new and different to them. They've never owned a home before in their life. They've never purchased a home, but also do they see themselves, as part of this community that they're maybe interested in purchasing a home in.
Right. And what's interesting is that that's the same feeling across all cultures, whether it's ethnicities, people of color. So it's the same common issue that I think sometimes people don't recognize. And so that's good to know that, in general, as a brokerage or our next question that you've led into very, very nicely, as individuals, as realtors, and I like to look beyond our community as realtors because we're also humans and we live in these communities and we support these communities. And we talk about, fair housing starts with us. How can we reach our realtor community? How can we reach our neighbors, our friends, to help them understand how they can be more inclusive with their practices, with their everyday conversations, especially when it comes to real estate?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think studies show that communities that support diversity and welcome diversity tend to thrive better economically. And you look at the communities that are doing quite well in the state of Michigan, in terms of housing markets, and you guys would know that much better than I am. But you look at a community like Ann Arbor, or like I said, Royal Oak, or Southfield, or Huntington Woods. Some of those communities. Those are communities that have welcomed and embraced diversity, and not only just based on sexual orientation and gender identity, but also you see a great deal of racial diversity, and that makes a difference for people. And so I think everybody, to help encourage members of a community to understand the benefits of diversity, and also a community that has a local human rights ordinance that's LGBT inclusive, that sends a very important symbolic message to people that yes, you are welcome, and that if you encounter difficulties, you have some sort of protections. I think that's very significant.
Gotcha. Perfect. So one last quickie, and then we'll let you go. Where can we find a list of those communities that do have gender identity and sexual orientation protections? Is there a place where we can find that list so we know what those communities are?
Well, I used to have a list that's a little outdated, but I think Equality Michigan might have that list. I pretty much know a lot of the communities in Oakland County, Wayne County, and Macomb County that have those local ordinances. And a lot of times they don't have significant remedies to redress discrimination that a civil rights law would have, but they do send a very powerful message to people, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, but also this idea that, we are a welcoming community and we would like you to be a part of our community.
Great, thank you. We will provide the link to Equality Michigan for folks on this video chat, so they know exactly where to go, and hopefully that's helpful. So Jay, thank you so much. We go way back, and I so appreciate you spending some time with us and helping us just get better at what we do. It's we look at the Code of Ethics, we look at inclusion as just being good business, and so we appreciate all you do on our behalf with regard to that.
Thank you for this opportunity, and you guys keep up the great work you're doing.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I just realized, and it drives me crazy, how many times I said, I'm like, so I apologize for that. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping here. We should have done at the beginning. First of all, this is brought to you by the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at GMAR, and we're very grateful for their commitment to bringing diversity front of mind with regard to housing. Along those lines, our chair is Paul Baracco, vice chair is Jay Sanders, who you heard from at the beginning, and Tracy Dean is our staff liaison. So Tracy kind of keeps us all on task and makes sure that we do all the things we're supposed to be doing. If you have questions and you don't want to forget about them, if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see chat with a little box that would have little thing that pops up over your head. Go ahead and throw those questions in there. When we get towards the get to the end, we will go through those questions in order that we received them. And if there's repeats, we'll try to get just the answer to the one question. So go ahead and throw those in there now. It's notifying me that you have questions or comments to make. So you don't have to wait till the end. So hopefully Steve will have some time to stick with us later, but our next speaker is Steve Tomkowiak, and Steve is the executive director of the Fair Housing Center of Metropolitan Detroit, which was established in 1977. The Fair Housing Center of Metropolitan Detroit is the oldest fair housing center in Michigan and one of the oldest in the nation. Steve's background as a fair housing attorney for 28 years led him to his position as executive director in 2018. Steve obtained federal court jury verdicts of $130,000 and $700,000 residential mortgage lending discrimination cases under the Fair Housing Act, which are believed to be the only two successful jury verdicts in such cases. Apart from work, Steve and his wife have stayed busy raising their 10 children. So God bless you, Steve. So ladies and gentlemen, we present our interview with Steve Tomkowiak.
Yes, and I just wanted to say before I go ahead and put that on the screen that I did put the link that Jay mentioned in the chat box as well. So, and we are currently live on YouTube. We had some bandwidth issues with Facebook, and so we tried to work around that, and Kevin was extremely helpful. And so we're live on YouTube now, and that link is on the event page.
Great, thanks, August.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you giving us your expertise. So let's jump right in with some questions. Sound good?
That's fine.
All right, great. So, with these unprecedented times that we're finding ourselves in right now, I'm wondering if you can share with us how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted fair housing practices, just with regard to your experience so far in this pandemic.
what we've experienced is overall a bit of a drop off on the general fair housing kind of calls and complaints that we receive. But what we are getting though is more moratorium, landlord tenant type questions. People are very confused, very unsure about what the situation is. For example, the people that have received notices to quit, or they're behind in their rent and they're not sure what to do. There's some vague understanding that the landlord can't file, but they're not sure what to do. And so it just puts that, and I think maybe it's on the housing provider side as well. They're not sure what to do. Other problem that we receive too is that people are calling because they need housing. They know that when they go out and look for housing and that, they don't think they can't get into the office. They have, we have to keep a distance in that. So they don't know what to do. And so it's put a crimp on people getting alternative housing. The other part, which is real disturbing, and I think it's, maybe, the people who watch this video will think that, that there are 4 main fair housing centers in the state and there's legal services out in Flint, but all of us are seeing seems to be hitting people with disability more than the general population. It's becoming a real problem. Whether it's in the Detroit area with gentrification, people wanting new tenants in to pay the market rate or whatever, but we're seeing more acts like that targeted against people with disabilities. It runs a gambit. There are a variety of things that are occurring, but almost far overwhelming majority has to do with people with disabilities, and it's very, very concerning. That's a very vulnerable population, and they're facing the brunt of it.
When you say people with disabilities, can you explain what that includes? Yeah,
I mean, Fair Housing Act, people think it's followed under the ADA. The ADA is modeled after the Fair Housing Act under the Rehabilitation Act. So that's the way the progression goes. But it's people that, are on Social Security would be one, Social Security disability, people with, mental impairments, those kinds of things. Just a general category of what you would consider someone with a disability. And,
so why do you think that's happening right now? Is that a kind of a byproduct of the coronavirus issues? And is there a specific reason why that's more focused on?
Maybe it gives cover, or maybe, it's always present. I just see a lot more of it now. Maybe because of the reasonable accommodation, reasonable modification requirements. That could be something. When you're dealing with someone with a disability, they have unique needs. And there's no question it's going to require a bit more from a housing provider or from an apartment complex. It could be emotional support, and it could be a variety of things. But the law says you have to do it. You have to make the housing available. You have to make reasonable accommodation and modifications so that they can use and enjoy their property as a non-disabled person can do.
We do work very hard as realtors to educate our realtors, our community, on what those laws are. Obviously, real estate is what we call local, so we deal with federal laws, state laws, and we are, especially with regard to landlords or property managers, we found a lot of issues. So we're seeing some of the same things.
I would say the underlying the Fair Housing Act is the idea that an agent, real estate agent, broker, whatever, brings expertise into any housing transaction. There are exemptions under the Fair Housing Act, single family, and they call it the Mrs. Murphy, but those are no exceptions or no exemptions with the single family. If there's a real estate agent involved, with Congress, I've even read the legislative history, Congress had the idea that if there's a real estate agent involved, the person involved in the real estate transaction should know the law and will hold them accountable. So it presumes the broker has expertise, the real agent has expertise, and will communicate that and bring that to bear during the transaction. I get really troubled when I see that doesn't occur.
Yeah, we have we're speaking about realtors, which I won't get into the weeds, but there's a difference between a real estate agent and a realtor. There's about 1.4 million realtors in the country, and we have a code of ethics that we're required to follow, and a lot of this falls under that. So it's disturbing to hear that's the issue, and that's part of the reason that we're having this conversation today, really looking for some guidance, trying to educate our realtors, take them further, especially with this month being Fair Housing Month. And we know this is, I think, the 52nd anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, so we should be better at it by now.
I use the terminology broker, agent, realtor, kind of synonymous. I shouldn't. I mean, your group knows the distinction. But I am familiar with the ethical rules. They track the Fair Housing Act. It's virtually almost like verbatim quoting it. So it's basically taking chunks of the Fair Housing Act, put it right into your ethical rules, which is unique. Right. No other, I don't know of any other ethical rules that actually do that.
No, we are a unique codified set of ethics in that way, that we take the law and then sometimes we don't go beyond, we don't go outside of the law, but in a lot of cases we do go beyond the law, especially with other protections with regard to sexual orientation, gender identity, things like that. So we know that you probably get, hundreds, thousands of cases perhaps in fair housing issues in the Detroit area. So from an attorney's perspective, what are some of your recommendations when we're working with homeowners who refuse to be inclusive, who direct us that they do not want to work with specific protected classes? What kind of advice can you give us?
I mean, we have a almost publishable level guide to address the kind of common questions that you deal with. But it really, I would like to see everybody on board. In other words, if someone makes that kind of a statement, they only want to deal with some groups or another, that be challenged. Say, look, the law requires, or you find a more maybe a gentle way of saying it, but there's no way that I can go along with that. It's never permitted to exclude it or any particular group of people. The other part is kind of a positive way to approach it, which I always prefer. If you're, what kind of a community do you aspire to? What would you like to see? The idea is a diverse variety of backgrounds, economic, racial, religious. That's what we should want to do. I mean, I've seen groups where they want to restrict housing to people within their own religious group, very common. I had some agents, realtors, I would be careful to use the right word. And they thought that, well, it's a commercial property, you can restrict it. And, well, you can restrict it, for example, a mosque only selling to Muslims, or a church only selling to another church, whatever. And misunderstanding that the Fair Housing Act only covers residential property, but Michigan law fills the gap. It's illegal to do it. A church property or any religious property has to be offered to everyone. And if you look at it that way, right, we can live in a society where we can acknowledge people that are different, and we enjoy that kind of an interaction. So set up the goal of what true diversity really means. We give lip service to it. We all do.
I think that sometimes, we recognize, first of all, I love the definition that to have a more inclusive, a more diverse community is really the way to go, and that just because somebody isn't of the same faith doesn't mean they can't understand what you're looking for and work with you. I like that opportunity to educate other people. I think quite frequently, as you just mentioned, the realtor may not be aware. They just say things without being fully aware that they're stepping into an issue. And quite frankly, there's a lot of people in a lot of places that don't pay their rent. So, we try to avoid being that specific. So
other complaints we haven't gotten a case like this, but the complaints I've gotten this from broker, and I'm using the word broker correctly.
Yes.
Where they see realtors being not as careful as they should be in some of the social media, some of the listings, where they have to really be on guard. I know the Fair Housing Act 3604C or 804C talks about discriminatory statements, so it can be oral or written, but it only needs to indicate simple preference. It's not turning down somebody, just a preference leaning toward one group or another will be a violation. So you're basically always on the clock. Assume that everything you say, orally or written, can come out and could be used against you. And I always tell somebody, think of someone else. Any discussion that you have, pretend there's a third person listening in. Or would they be comfortable? If you're communicating with the buyer, if the seller heard it, what would the seller think of that, what you were saying? And vice versa. And if you keep that in mind, I think you'll be in a lot better shape than if you're just a little bit careless. I mean, because you're trying to make a deal, you're trying to get it closed, but you really have to be careful.
Great advice. And you know, we try to educate our realtors fully, but obviously not everybody's going to get it right off the bat. So I think that's great advice. You know, just because the third person isn't there, what would they think or say if they heard you saying that? And quite frankly, it's, you know, do the right thing because it's the right thing. Do you find that there are more discriminatory acts? And I think I know the answer to this, but let's, you know, I'd love to get your perspective. More discriminatory acts with regard to renting property as opposed to, and I mean, you know, on the part of landlords or property managers, as opposed to a home seller or
Yes.
realtor.
Absolutely. In a variety of reasons for it. I think one of the main reasons are economic or socioeconomic. Rent tenants tend to have lower income. They lack the financial resources. They have difficulty bouncing back as much. I also see, you know, a couple cases that I mentioned where it didn't actually go. There was a third one now where we had a black woman contacted our office. She had over about $1 million in liquid assets and made an affluent white community, made cash offers and couldn't seem to buy a home. It happened several times. So we waited for her to give us the details and the information about it, when she made the offer, the listing agreement, who the real estate agents were and so forth, who the owner and sellers were, and she didn't get it. So I'm assuming she's able to get a home and really didn't want to go through all the stress of litigation. So that doesn't reach us. Some of the discrimination in race discrimination landlord-tenant occurs in high affluent areas where minorities, blacks are trying to rent. Another thing that we see, you know, again, getting back to the income level, poor are economically vulnerable. They're never too far away from being evicted, and it's not easy for them to go and get alternative housing. The low income tend to be minority, higher percentage of minority. Unlike other fair housing centers, we still have the majority of our cases are race discrimination cases. Others have more disability-related cases than race cases. They also tend to be people with disabilities or disability-related income. They generate a lot of our complaints, and most of the majority of our complaints come from women with women and women with children. So those are kind of things. For example, Warren is 8th in the nation in eviction rates as of last study I saw in 2016. What part of Warren do you think those evictions are originating from? You can guess. That kind of a thing. So we really have to be aware of these things. Another factor is a crisis in affordable housing, especially for extremely low income households in that. And there isn't habitable housing. We get a number of housing related complaints with habitability. However, I would say this, we are targeting the sales market. We're always targeting the sales market and in the more affluent outlying areas. U of M put our complaint data together for a 9-year period, and we're just not getting complaint activity in northern Oakland and Macomb County. Now, whether some of those may be rural areas in that, but we have to do more at our end to increase our presence out there. But we are definitely interested in any kind of discrimination in the sales market, absolutely. And in the commercial market as well. There's discrimination that occurs there as well. I just don't think it gets reported with the same degree of frequency.
Yeah, and you know, with regard to that, you know, and it wasn't necessarily in my list of questions to you, but I'm sure you can let us know. So how would somebody find you? You know, when we're experiencing these issues, is it best to go online to your website? Is there a phone? You know, when we will provide a link to your website with this information. What's the best?
We got a new website coming out, but that's how people tend to find us 2 ways. One, they go online, do a self-search on discrimination. They find us, and majority of our complaints come in through phone calls. We do get some online through our website. Rare that we'll get a fax type of a complaint coming in that way. And that's if people find out on their own, but more often it comes through a referral. Someone will be told to contact us or suggested that they contact us. We get some of our best cases come from realtors. There's no question about it. Realtors have the expertise and knowledge to know when something really looks discriminatory and have done it, provided good information, you know, laid out the chronology of it. That's very, you know, we give that, you know, a lot of weight. I mean, from a realtor, you could imagine. It doesn't mean the realtor is going to be dragged into the whole thing. It just means give us the information and let us do what we need, need to do.
I'm very happy to hear that a large portion of these issues are reported by or through realtors. That makes me
I wouldn't say a large portion, but we do have people report it, as they should.
Right, good. And how easy is that to do, to report it? I think a lot of times people think it's a very complicated set of circumstances. Share with us a little bit about that.
Oh, we have a kind of, we do a complaint intake form. It's a page long, and there's the things that we're required for grant purposes. We have to, report, even if it's a disability case, we still have to report race and different things like that. And then just a short scenario of what the circumstances are. It's very short. An intake could go anywhere from 20 minutes to 35, 40 minutes max. And for example, if a realtor reports it, well, we would be then contacting the prospective buyer or the tenant, or it could even be a landlord, it could be anybody, but we, most of the information gathering would go through them. I mean, then we would then follow up if the realtor have any additional information that, we haven't received from the people involved, are you willing to provide it? And of course, we can then send out testers, black white testers, or testers with disabilities, or testers with children, and to see, get the information that way. So yeah, it's not a red tape type office. We're not.
Right.
It's amazing the results that come from the most notable fair housing cases come from these independent fair housing centers. More than you get from state and local agencies. Again, in Michigan, there's just the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, but we're not adverse to them. We work hand in hand with them. We have a good relationship with them. We work with them. We guide people with filing complaints to Michigan Department of Civil Rights or HUD. We also have a group of independent cooperating attorneys that we can have that are willing to take a case on a contingency basis. And it's something to make sure that people realize too, we have never charged in 42 years, no one has ever paid a dime for our services. So it's either through funds or fundraising, grant funds or fundraising, or sometimes lawsuit proceeds where we actually have a policy where at times we will step in and be a plaintiff.
So two excellent points there. One, that there's no cost to it, and I think that's an important thing to know. But also, not that we should be motivated by this, but that there are testers out there, and so we should be aware of it. I would hope that that's not the motivation to treat people fairly and treat everyone all the same in that scenario, but that there are testers out there. And I think that there's a lot of people that think because of budgetary issues or what have you, that there aren't. And I think that's a good point.
It's unchanged. Our testing activities are unchanged. They look to be unchanged for the foreseeable future. I would say what makes us unique too is we have a contract with HUD. We also have a contract with 11 other jurisdictions. A couple counties in various cities and township within Wayne, Oakland, Macomb counties. We work with them, so we test those areas as well. So there has been no drop off. In fact, we're looking to probably increase our testing activities. I'm not saying the realtors are the focus of our testing. I mean, ideally, realtors are the professional most knowledgeable in terms of fair housing. It's assumed they are, but we're not actually out to get anybody. The goal is not to go and start a lawsuit. The goal is to have people conform their conduct to fair housing requirements. That's the goal. Right. So we're not out to get anybody. We're not out to drive somebody out of business. No, we want people to be fully in compliant with fair housing requirements. That's what it is. And it's fair. That's what anybody would want.
Right, right. It's similar to our code of ethics, where we prefer it to be educational as opposed to punitive. That the education portion of it will lay out a better future.
And so, it's a last resort if you have to go the court route. That is supposed to be the last resort. So yeah, I'm not saying we don't get the maximum amount in a case. I mean, there are times where, for example, there may be a pool of people that have been adversely treated. I went with a group of people in drug treatment programs that were all evicted, 60 to 70 people out of an apartment complex. Wow. In Canton. And because they were in that program, the nursing program, it's like the nonprofit that ran the program, provided housing, never late in 15 years, paid upwards of $20,000 a month, and suddenly they want a new ownership, management wants to come in and evict all the people in that program. And so you just scratch your head like, and so then you talk to the people and find out when they walked in the first day that they moved in, they said, well, are you part of that program? In other words, if you're part of that program, well, then you're a different group of person as opposed to everybody else. So those are the kind of things that we see.
Poor business decision too. Man, you got somebody that paid their rent on time for 15 years.
Oh, and not only they confirm it in an email saying, oh, well, you know what? I'm sure you're going to have no problem, the management company, you're going to have no problem finding another place to stay because you have such a great payment record.
Right.
Just
crazy.
Okay, so great. Well, the rent to them.
Right. So, so we talk about fair housing starts with us. That, you know, realtors in our industry have an obligation to educate and to provide the tools that will help individuals become more inclusive, especially when we talk about landlords or property managers, or even in some cases, home sellers and certainly professional realtors. What do you think is the best tool that we can utilize, and how can we, in your opinion, educate folks, not just the general public, but other realtors as well, with regard to fair housing issues?
I would have everyone adopt kind of an affirmative marketing policy, and that applies. And that means expanding housing choices for people. Consider people to be a little bit broader in the areas that they're looking at and the homes that they're willing to consider. And in other words, you know, you want to make sure that you're just not marketing white areas to whites and black areas to black, but you actually say, you know, you may consider some other areas. You may just to open up those kind of possibilities. You want it to be something from a total office, from the top all the way down, from the minute someone walks in the door, all the way through, and that's just to understand that that's how we do. And that kind of affirmative policy, open policy, is reflected in all that we do. The kind of advertising, where the advertising gets placed, selection of models or pictures, who's in the pictures that you're showing. You can't have all white, all black models, and your employees, that you have some diversity with your employees, training and staff. So just, it's just kind of the way that you do things. And to make sure that differences among people are appreciated and respected and acknowledged, and it's fine. A true professional looks past those things anyways. Doesn't matter to me. It shouldn't matter what your background is. Another part is to say something positive about all communities. If you're asked about it, right, you're not selling one community over the other. You find something good to say about every community. Another one is really affirm the wishes of people that make non-traditional, pro-integration type choices. And it's surprising because you would think that, well, segregation is not such a problem anymore. We're still second in the nation. And you can say, well, Southfield has a high minority population now. But if you start to drill down by school district, you find out there's a black area Southfield, there's a white area Southfield. And you can go through all the communities that way, and you find out, well, we still have some segregation issues as well. And then really operate this way too, overall, that fair housing, one housing market is a reality, and all housing is open to everybody. That's what it is. And not, you know, as a guy, I did a case out in Kalamazoo, and he was trying to get into Portage. He had been on a waiting list for years. There were three people, him, a black friend, and a white woman. The three of them were really close friends. And the two of them were on the waiting list for years. She got offered twice the opportunity to come in and rent. And in the last months of his life, he goes, you know, I understand. That's just the way things are. And that's the mindset I really want to fight against. We do not go by, well, that's the way things are. We go from the way things should be. That's the goal. That's the model. That's what we have in our mind. So proceed as though there is no problem. There are no racists. There is no racism or any kind of prejudice or bias. And that's how we live our life. And that's what we hold other people accountable to. There is no status quo. It's not everybody else is doing it. Wipe all that away. That's kind of the mindset that you have to have. You know, how do you treat somebody when they come in the office? Do you assess them real quick? Are they really the kind of person that is going to go through that process successfully? You know, I want to say one thing too. I talk a lot about the rental market, and that to me, and I say this again and again and again, is the realtors are the heroes because you achieve home ownership for people.
Right.
That's, you know, whether it's Detroit, any other community, we still have that large gap when it comes to home ownership by race, whether it's Black or Hispanic. That needs to bridge that gap. The goal for a family to acquire wealth, it has education benefits, health benefits, cultural benefits, is home ownership. So realtors are the heroes in that, not just preventing discrimination, but getting people into home ownership. That's the goal. Right. And your heroes, your work is very important. We support it, we applaud it. So don't think of us just as the fair housing hammer to come down on people. Right. We think you're outstanding. You know, bring us in like you're doing and have us talk to people, and they can kind of see we're on the same page.
You actually touched on a point that when we teach fair housing and we talk about the code of ethics, just to having an overall policy and a marketing strategy that's all inclusive, that trickles down from the top to the bottom and everybody gets it. And I think of all the things you may have said with regard to a realtor today, that's probably the best because we don't think in those terms. And so, you know, I think that's great. I
tell people, look at their own life. Ask yourself who your friends are, what they look like.
Right.
I mean, is your world kind of narrow and it's only group like yourself? Well, then that's going to be reflected in your work. So you've got to broaden your horizons. Right. I mean, we can't even, you know, politics is a classic one. People can't even talk about it anymore, right? Yeah. I mean, please, put all that stuff aside. There are more important things. You know, people love their families, right? They all do. Yeah. Yeah. They pretty much care about the place that they live. You know, everybody wants a home where it's peaceful. Is your home peaceful? You know, you have conflicts in your home or in your community, or you want everybody, let's start talking about some of the common things that we have. But those are the kind of things. And then, you know, the hammer on it would be, look, this is your policy. It's all inclusive. It covers your organization. If someone is not on board with affirmative, you know, marketing and sales practices, then they really shouldn't be working here. And right. that's something that you drill in day one, and it never changes. And just because you've been here 25, 30 years and you're a great, you know, producer, then you don't get a free ride.
Right.
You know, and I have mentioned about sex discrimination and harassment, you know, that bears into it as well. That should never play a role either. You don't see it as much in the sales market, but you see it in the rental market. It's tragic when that occurs.
Right. So, you know, Steve, thank you so much for this great information. Again, I'll go back to realtors are heroes. I love that. And I've always believed that as well. So, you know,
I've said that for years. I have the same, I'll say the same thing in front of any group, period. I'll say the same thing in front of any group. And I would extend that to people that do loans, loan officers, underwriters, doing the same thing. You can do all the work on making the sale. If they can't get that loan to go through, right, you can't close the deal. So they're very, very important too. And I mean, it's harder for someone that's lower income, more marginal credit. It's a lot more work, but really consider it as a profession, not just dollars and cents. It's a profession. Right. And you know, we make progress one homeowner at a time, one buyer at a time. So, but don't for a second think that your work and your efforts are not appreciated. Right. I don't think you hear that enough, especially from people where I sit. You don't hear that.
Right.
All you hear about us coming after you and looking for ways we can catch you doing something wrong. That's not the right approach. Yeah. Right. Like I said, if you see a problem, report it. Please.
Right. You get us, Steve, and that we'll end on that comment. If you see it, report it, and we appreciate the work you do on behalf of everybody. And your focus on fair housing, we feel it's very important. It's a huge part of our realtor world and our code of ethics. And thank you so much for sharing your information, your expertise with us
today. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Again, you do it not because it's a code of ethics. You do it because it's the right thing.
Exactly.
Woohoo, we're heroes. I love that. I take that with me all the time. Thank you, Steve. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but with regard to Jay's comments and Steve's comments, one of the important things they talked about was having a policy in place, having a marketing strategy, having it in your business plan, that it starts there, that if you have embedded it in what you're going to look at every day with regard to guiding your business, you can't help but stick to it. So I love that they both had those comments. So our next panelist is Kim Page. She's the owner of FrontPage Properties in Detroit. Kim opened the very first Keller Williams franchise in Detroit, leading and training hundreds of successful realtors since 2004. In 2012, she opened FrontPage Properties, which is currently the largest female-owned African-American real estate brokerage in Michigan. Kim has received the Spirit of Detroit Award in 2008, among others. Kim runs FrontPage Properties with her daughter, who is also on this call, Valencia Page. And Kim enjoys singing and boating in her free time. So let's move to Kim's video.
Hi, Kim. Thanks so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I want to jump right in with, we've got a set of circumstances right now, a global pandemic, unlike anything we've ever experienced. And I'm wondering, or we're wondering, if the coronavirus has impacted fair housing practices that you've experienced. And if it has, what are those things that have been happening?
Well, I would say right now, it's nothing that I have experienced yet personally, but what I am noticing pretty much is what's being mentioned that I'm thinking about as far as banks are concerned. It's being mentioned that certain banks like Chase Bank, for instance, is going to, raise their credit standards as far as going from maybe a once, 660 or 650 all the way up to a 700 credit score, along with, of course, a larger down payment. That would definitely be a concern to me as far as fair housing, because with that being said, if credit scores are actually raised and you have to actually put more money down, that I think would affect, a lot of people as far as in minority communities, which of course, which is fair housing. So I'm hoping that that doesn't happen, but I'm seeing a lot of sources mentioning that that may happen, because that may cut a lot of people out of purchasing a home, especially, first-time home buyers that may not have a 700 credit score, or someone that may not have 20% down. If you're looking at an average sales price of 100,000, then that could be 20,000 down for somebody that may not be able to afford that type of down payment. So that's how I'm seeing it, affect, our market as far as Detroit is concerned.
And we're certainly not at the end of this, or maybe even a light at the end. So the things that may come out of it are yet to be known.
Yeah, and I'm hoping
that's a good point. Just across the I think that's a good point across the board. Is that heightened credit expectations from lenders can be an issue, especially for those communities.
Yes.
And if we don't have first-time home buyers, as you know, we don't have second time, and we don't have third time. We have to start somewhere. So as a woman of color and a business owner, and you've forged obviously a great path as a leader and a role model. What are some of your observations regarding fair housing practices in the Detroit area? I think that you bring a great perspective.
I've been in the Detroit area now for about about 22 years. And what I have experienced myself as far as fair housing, I would say is the cost, the prices of home purchases versus in Detroit versus our suburban counterparts, just on the other side, basically of 8 Mile in Detroit. This is what I've experienced. If it's like Southfield or, on the other side of 8 Mile or Ferndale, the same type of houses may be, a $200,000 house that looks exactly like on the other side of 8 Mile in Detroit that may only be priced at, $80,000 or $100,000. So I would definitely say, that, there is, something to that. If you have the same house, in one area, that's not basically the same price as another house in another area. And that, to me, since I've been in real estate, I've always seen that. In Detroit, and that's always been a concern of mine. Why is there such a disparity as far as the prices are concerned in one area versus another when you have, basically the same type of property? So I would say basically with the prices of homes that unfortunately a lot of people that are in Detroit are minorities, live in Detroit, and the home values are less than certain areas outside of the city.
Right. And so you feel that precludes somebody from moving to those suburbs because it's just, there's such a disparity?
Yes. Yes. Yes, I do. And like I said, I've noticed that basically, throughout my career in real estate. The differences between, the two. And I still don't know why yet, as far as the differences between the sales prices of, one versus the other. It
is a question I think that many of us have. And what's interesting is that you've experienced the same thing from day one, 20 some years ago to today.
Always now.
I think that speaks volumes about how far we have to go still with regard to fair housing. This April, as we've said, is Fair Housing Month. This is the 52nd anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, and yet we're still dealing with some systemic issues that we need to focus on. And I think that's an excellent point that probably a lot of people don't think about, especially if they work primarily in the suburbs, because we're missing out on an opportunity with first-time home buyers, especially. So we know, in the code of ethics that we adhere to as a realtor, that's a crucial part of our business. That there's no exceptions for this type of thing. That we treat all people equally. That we follow the golden rule, and we talk a lot about fair housing with regard to the public home buyers, home sellers, especially renters. Have you had experience, without specific names, other realtors and issues you may have with working with other realtors with regard to fair housing issues?
With working with other realtors, I would say yes. I've had experiences in the past, with other realtors, even up until now. That's something that, I think that needs to change too. Like you said, like you just said yourself, when you're following the golden rule and also, our code of ethics, which is one thing that I basically, first of all, live by as far as following the golden rule. I truly believe that, you would want to be treated, I would, treat others basically as I would want to be treated. And, in this industry, being of color, African-American woman myself, there has been times, in this industry, even as far as the treatment, that I've received from other realtors. In our industry. But I would definitely say there needs to be some improvement there. And, I would just say to that, if you are another realtor, on the other side, like I treat everybody the same. Basically, I treat everybody as I would want to be treated. I live by the golden rule. The thing I do is I always ask myself this question, and maybe that person needs to ask themselves this question as well. Am I treating this person the way that I would want to be treated? And that's a simple yes or no question. There's no in between.
Right.
You know, that being said, so yeah. So
there's no exceptions there. So beyond that, have you found issues working with anybody that doesn't understand the importance of inclusivity, diversity, and that may have chosen not to work with you or other realtors or even the public?
Oh, yeah. I've definitely, you know, and that's something, like you said, that could be improved upon with everyone, not just, you know, realtors, but of course, buyers, sellers, you know, and transactions. You know, I myself have personally, you know, had a couple of buyers or sellers in my career actually discriminate against me, even though I was actually doing my job. So yes, it does happen. Unfortunately, there are, you know, individuals in this world that are still, you know, discriminative towards others. And yeah, but I have had personal experiences. I would say one that stands out to me, if I may, for example, is it was an actual seller, one that I could think of in particular, whereas I went to actually list this seller's house. I forget, I think the city, it was actually in Hazel Park, I want to say, and they needed me to actually list their house. But when I got to their house, one of the questions that was asked of me from the seller, I mean, this was more of a concern to her than what I would be listing her house for or anything else. You know, the concern was, are you putting a sign in front of my house? And if you do put a sign in front of my house, are you going to have a picture of you on the sign in front of my house? So at first I didn't really think anything of it. I'm thinking, well, you know, maybe it's, you know, she doesn't want a sign, but that wasn't the issue. She wanted one, but the seller just did not want a picture of me on the sign. You know, so I could kind of, you know, read in between the lines and, you know, that she did not actually want a picture of me, because she blamed it on her neighbors and said, well, my neighbors don't really, you know, take too kindly, you know, as she put it to me, to having, you know, I don't mean to offend you, but an African American on the sign. But, you know, I knew deep down inside that, of course, it's not the neighbors, it's you. Right. You know, you're accountable for your own actions, right. You know, not your neighbors, not anyone else. And then at the same time, of course, not really wanting to, you know, look at me or actually shake my hand when I first came in the door either as well. But you know what, how did I handle that? You know, on the other side of it, you know, I just kept it professional. And also, you know, knew that, you know, I'm not going to step out of being professional or doing my job basically because of someone else's ignorance. So, you know, I just learned to look over that and not let it.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
so the big question is, you know, so you went ahead and listed the house.
Yes, at the end of the day, you know, I stayed professional and I went on ahead and listed the house only because another, you know, relative of hers asked me to, you know, and at the end of the day, her son actually reached out to me and said, you know, well, you know, I know what was said to you. My mom kind of told me what she did and he apologized for it. And I went ahead and listed the house, but somewhat at a distance. I continued to basically keep the listing, but communicate with her son at that point. And, you know, and just basically helped out and took the listing to the end. And like I said, at the end of the day, just remained professional. You know, I know who I am, you know, in it. Yeah. So.
You would be as successful as you are if you didn't have a good
exactly sure. Right.
So have there been times when you just walked away, when you just said, this isn't going to work, this relationship isn't going to work? Or have you always found a way to turn it into a positive situation and make it work?
Well, yeah, for the most part, I turn it into a positive situation, but there, you know, has been probably a time or two that I have walked away from it. And, you know, with me, a person would have to be really extreme, you know, for me to actually walk away, you know, from a listing, you know, based. And of course, that would be, you know, based on how I'm treated. If it just, you know, got totally out of hand, like, you know, wait a minute now, you know, then, yeah, there has been a time or two where I actually, you know, walked away or actually fired that client, you know, beforehand, you know, and sometimes it is best to do that. So I'm not just going to say that, you know, I remain with everyone. No, if you're treating me, you know, unfairly or a way that I would not want to be treated, then of course, then I'm going to, most of the time I do walk away from it. But there have been times when, you know, just like with that time when I worked with her son instead of her, that client that I just mentioned, then we were able to move forward with it.
Yeah, and that's great. And I'm sure once they saw your professionalism, that changes the relationship. But there's times when we walk away for a myriad of reasons, or would like to anyway. When you've experienced things like that, and what kind of advice would you give to other folks about how you recognize fair housing issues? And I'm going off of script a little bit here, but I think that you probably have some good advice on when you recognize them. What do you do? What's the first step you take? It sounds like your first step is to try and educate that person and work with them. What would you suggest that we as realtors do when we find ourselves in those situations?
Well, you know, what I've done, you know, and what I would suggest to anyone else that does find themselves in that type of situation, as I have before, because like I said, that person that I just mentioned wasn't, you know, the first, and it probably won't be the last, you know, unfortunately. But what I would normally do is what I would suggest for anyone else to do is, you know, if it gets to a point where, you know, right from the beginning, if you're feeling like that this person is discriminating against you or being prejudiced towards you in any type of way, then of course, you know, you don't have to continue to work with them. You know, you don't have to take the listing, you know, because like I said, I have values and I'm fair and I'm transparent with people. And if they're not treating me in the way right from the beginning that I want to be treated, then I would personally more than likely walk away from that listing. You know, It's not worth it, you know, at the end of the day. It's not
the customer is not always right. You know,
not always right.
Right. And we teach that in Code of Ethics all the time. Look, you know, it's going to follow our codified set of ethics and the law. And I think that's an important point. And being able to walk away is great. So kind of to wrap this up, you know, when we talk about fair housing, we use the phrase fair housing starts with us. As individuals, as realtors, just as a you know, human race, how do you think we can teach each individual realtor how to do their best to ensure that they're being inclusive in all their practices?
You know what I would say to that? I would say one word to that. You know, the word that I would use for that is transparency. You know, be transparent. You know, be transparent with us as realtors. You know, if you're working with another realtor, be transparent with them, meaning be fair. You know, be fair no matter what to all parties. Me being the realtor on the other side, the buyer, the seller, you know, to everyone that's involved, to be as transparent, you know, as you can. And then another thing I would say to that is, like we discussed earlier, just following the golden rule. It's just that simple. You know, treat others as you would want to be treated. Like I said, treat others as you would want to be treated. And again, ask yourself, would I want to be treated the way that I am treating this person? And if the answer is no, then don't treat them that way. Don't do it. You know, see, like I said, a yes or no answer, you know, to that. But definitely transparency and, of course, code of ethics and following the golden rule.
Yeah.
That's it.
I sometimes I think I try to treat people like they were my mom.
Yeah,
So,
and that's what I do.
I want somebody to treat her, right?
Right, exactly. You know, and you have to treat people, you know, on all sides fairly. I mean, that's how I do business, and I feel like that's one of the keys to my success. You know, and even being in this business this long, you know, for almost 22 years this year, full time, you know, is because, you know, I treat people the way that I would want to be treated. I treat people fairly, you know, in all of my transactions and everything, and just in life, you know, and everything that I do. So, you know, that of course flows over into my work. You know, how you are in your life every day actually is going to flow over into your work anyway. You know, I feel like if you're treating people a certain way, you know, even in your work life, you know, with you being a realtor, then to me, you're pretty much that way even in real life, you know, right from the get.
Right. And we know our business is becomes so personal and so relationship based. And I think that's an excellent point that you make, that you live your life that way first,
Mm-hmm.
and then it translates into your business. And that's what we hope all realtors do. So, you know, we so appreciate not just today, but how you have led the way in our community, how you set the example for other realtors. As a woman of color, you know, we know that it wasn't always easy and probably still isn't. So we appreciate so much of that, and we look forward to seeing much more of you along the way and hearing your great words of inspiration.
Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to join you guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so we have time for a couple of questions. I'm going to go through the chat stream here, the question stream, and see what we've got. Sharon, I believe, Steve. Muted, sorry. Can you hear me now? All right. So Jay gave us some information on how we can find those 40 communities as realtors. Tom mentioned pending the Supreme Court's decision, which will be issued before the end of June, sexual orientation, gender identity, and transgender status should be viewed as covered under federal law. That's not the case under Michigan law. Sorry, going down the list here. Question for Kim from Sharon. Did you ever feel you ever lost a listing only because you did not look like the seller? Kim, are you on here?
Yes. The answer to that is definitely yes. Yes, I have lost a couple of listings in the past. You know, I feel because I did not look like the seller. So yes, the answer to that question is yes, definitely.
Oh, a shame, but Jacob, school districts have a high correlation with home values. In your experiences, are school districts and their underlying disparities being used as a tool / pseudocode of discrimination in communities? Who wants to take that? Perhaps Steve? Steve, I think you're muted. There you go. Still can't hear you. Can anybody else hear him? Keep getting muted. For some reason, I keep getting muted. Can you hear me now? Yeah, we can't hear Steve. Jay, do you want to field that question, perhaps?
Let's see. Well, so the question is, sometimes is a school district used as a way to discriminate in terms of sale of housing?
But I think basically like school district websites and that type of information.
Oh.
And the demographic of that school district.
Well, I mean, I think Steve mentioned that most of our communities are segregated, even when you find certain communities that you say it's diverse, but you look at certain neighborhoods and I think sometimes, yes, just in terms of through a particular school district or particular school within the school district, you can sometimes result in de facto segregation in terms of housing.
Gotcha. So there is, Steve put a comment in there, Realtor Fair Housing Guide includes this suggested response. To get the best answers to your questions, you should contact either the school or the school district's main office. And there's a lot of information we know on those websites. And So last question here before we let everybody go, from Tony Jennings. Could providing a list of communities be misconstrued as steering? Steve, can you say anything yet, or do you want to answer? Okay, Steve said, agree with Jay. If you make either complimentary or critical comments about schools based on the race of the home buyer and the racial characteristics of the school population, you could be exposed to charges of racial discrimination. And how about Jay's question there, would that be considered steering? We still can't hear you, so maybe you could type that in. So we're
It's showing that he's not muted.
yeah, it might be your sound on your computer because it doesn't say you're muted. It says turn on your PC audio in the Zoom. I think we're getting a typed answer there. Problem is whether the list includes only white or majority white communities, for example. So just don't be specific in that. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. Paul, are you still on somewhere? Paul Baracco?
Oh, Paul asked to extend his apologies. He's actually been very ill and was recently tested for COVID-19 and is waiting for those results. So he sends his extreme apologies and thanks everyone for
all of
stepping
you
into his place.
listening. We send our best to you. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to our panelists, most especially, and for the time you've taken to educate us. You guys are awesome. And we have, we can provide a recording of this town hall so it can be viewed later by other people, or you can be reminded of things that it said. I think it was incredible information, especially during Fair Housing Month. And we have information how to reach all three of these folks. If you would require further information, you can also email GMAR and we can give you more information as well. So thank you everyone, and hopefully we'll see you all in person soon. Stay home, stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to business running again, hopefully soon. So thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.